The secret is to assume it's already yours. That sounds simple, yet it is one of the most profound truths a person can ever discover. Most people spend their lives waiting. They wait for circumstances to change, for opportunities to appear, for money to arrive, for relationships to improve, and for success to finally find them. They believe that once they see the evidence in the outer world, they will feel secure, confident, and fulfilled. But life does not work that way. The outer world is not the cause, it is the effect. The inner world is the cause. The moment you understand this, everything begins to change. You realize that what you continuously accept as true within yourself eventually becomes your experience. The conditions of your life are not random events that happen without reason. They are reflections of the assumptions you have accepted, consciously or unconsciously. Therefore, if you desire a different life, you must begin by changing what you assume to be true. Most people make the mistake of looking at their current circumstances and using them as evidence of what is possible. They say, I don't have the money, so I cannot feel wealthy. They say, the relationship is not here, so I cannot feel loved. They say, the opportunity has not appeared, so I cannot feel successful. They wait for the physical world to give them permission to feel differently. Yet the physical world is only reflecting the state they are already occupying. If you continue to identify with lack, you continue to experience lack. If you continue to identify with struggle, you continue to experience struggle. If you continue to identify with disappointment, disappointment becomes familiar and recurring. The outer world faithfully mirrors the assumptions held within consciousness. This is why the secret is not to wish for what you want. It is not to hope for it. It is not even to work yourself into exhaustion, trying to force it into existence. The secret is to assume that it is already yours. What would you feel if your desire were already fulfilled? What would your thoughts be? How would you carry yourself? How would you look at life? How would you speak? These questions are not imaginary exercises. They reveal the state you must occupy. When someone receives wonderful news, they do not continue longing for it. They do not continue searching for evidence. They relax because the desire has been fulfilled. There is a sense of certainty, a sense of completion, a sense of inner peace. That feeling is the key. The challenge is that the mind has been trained to trust appearances. If the bank account shows a certain number, the mind believes that is the truth. If the relationship appears absent, the mind believes that absence is reality. If the job has not arrived, the mind believes unemployment is the final verdict. Yet appearances are temporary shadows. They are not permanent facts. They are simply the visible expression of previous assumptions. Imagine state, ending before a mirror. If you dislike the reflection, you would not try to change the mirror itself. You would change the person standing before it. The outer world is much like that mirror. Attempting to change reflections without changing assumptions is a frustrating and endless struggle. The real work is done within. To assume something is already yours does not mean pretending. It does not mean ignoring responsibilities or denying current facts. It means accepting inwardly that what you desire belongs to you now in consciousness. It means moving mentally and emotionally into the reality you wish to experience. There is a tremendous difference between wanting and having. Wanting implies separation. It implies that the thing desired is somewhere else, distant and unavailable. Having implies possession. It implies ownership. It implies certainty. Many people unknowingly remain in a state of wanting for years. They constantly say they want success, want abundance, want happiness, want not love. But wanting keeps the desire in the future. The future never arrives because consciousness remains focused on absence. The person who assumes it is already theirs has left the state of wanting. They have entered the state of having. Even before any visible evidence appears, they have accepted possession internally. This internal acceptance creates a shift in perception. Suddenly, opportunities appear where none seemed to exist before. Ideas emerge. Circumstances begin to rearrange themselves. Encounters happen at exactly the right time. What seemed impossible starts becoming natural. From the outside, it may appear as luck. Others may call it coincidence. But there is something deeper taking place. The inner assumption is expressing itself through the events of life. Think about how often fear shapes experience. Someone fears failure and continuously imagines negative outcomes. They replay disasters in their mind. They assume things will go wrong. Then, when difficulties arise, they believe the world has proven them right. Yet what really happened? The assumption was accepted first. The experience followed. The same principle works in reverse. If fear can create fearful experiences, faith can create desirable experiences. If negative assumptions can shape reality, positive assumptions can shape reality as well. The question is not whether assumptions influence your life. They do. The question is which assumptions you are choosing to entertain every day. Observe your inner conversations. Notice what you repeatedly tell yourself. Many people spend hours each day mentally arguing for their limitations. They rehearse reasons why something cannot happen. They revisit old disappointments. They tell stories of failure and rejection. Every time they do this, they reinforce the very state they wish to escape. Your inner dialogue matters because it reveals what you truly believe. It reveals what you have accepted as real. If your conversations with yourself are filled with doubt, fear, and limitation, those assumptions continue to shape your experiences. Instead, begin speaking to yourself from the standpoint of fulfillment. Let your thoughts reflect the reality you desire. Let your inner conversations imply that your wish has already been granted. This does not require force. It does not require constant effort. It requires consistency. A seed does not become a tree overnight. Once planted, it develops according to its nature. You do not dig it up every morning to check whether it is growing. You trust the process. The same trust is necessary when assuming your desire is already yours. Once you have accepted the assumption, allow it to develop. Do not constantly question whether it is working. Do not dig up the seed with doubt and impatience. One of the greatest obstacles people face is the habit of checking for evidence. They assume the desired state for a few moments, then immediately look to the outer world for confirmation. And they do not see instant results, they become discouraged. But if the assumption is truly accepted, there is no need for constant verification. The feeling of certainty becomes its own evidence. Consider how naturally you assume certain things now. You assume the sun will rise tomorrow. You assume your name belongs to you. You assume familiar facts about your life without effort. These assumptions feel natural because they have been accepted repeatedly. The goal is to make your desired reality feel just as natural. At first, it may feel unfamiliar. The old assumptions may attempt to reassert themselves. Doubt may appear. Fear may whisper that nothing is changing. Yet persistence is powerful. Every time you return to the feeling of fulfillment, you strengthen the new assumption. Every time you refuse to identify with limitation, you weaken the old state. Eventually, the new assumption becomes dominant. The remarkable thing is that reality begins to conform to what feels natural within you. Life reflects your state. Many people believe they must struggle endlessly to achieve their desires. They equate difficulty with value. They believe success requires suffering, abundance requires sacrifice, and happiness requires years of effort. Yet some of the most transformative changes occur not through struggle, but through a shift in identity. When you assume you are the person who already possesses the desired outcome, your behavior changes naturally. Your decisions change, your expectations change, your reactions change. You begin moving through life differently because you are no longer operating from lack. A person who feels abundant does not think like a person who feels deprived. A person who feels loved does not think like a person who feels abandoned. A person who feels successful does not think like a person who expects failure. The outer results are different because the inner identity is different. The world is constantly responding to who you believe yourself to be. Therefore, your greatest responsibility is not controlling circumstances. It is controlling your assumptions. When challenges appear, remember this principle. Do not allow temporary appearances to dictate your identity. Conditions come and go. States remain until changed. If you encounter delay, remain faithful to the assumption. If obstacles arise, remain faithful to the assumption. If evidence seems absent, remain faithful to the assumption. Persistence is not forcing reality. Persistence is remaining loyal to the fulfilled state despite appearances. Eventually, what was once invisible becomes visible. What was once internal becomes external. What was once assumed becomes experienced. This is the law operating in your life, whether you recognize it or not. Every achievement, every relationship, every opportunity, every transformation begins as a state accepted within consciousness. The person who understands this no longer lives as a victim of circumstances. They become a deliberate creator of experience. They understand that the future is not something to wait for. It is something to occupy mentally now. The secret is to stop asking when it will happen and start feeling that it has happened. Stop chasing and start possessing. Stop longing and start accepting. Stop identifying with absence and start identifying with fulfillment. Your desire exists for a reason. It points toward a possibility already available within consciousness. The moment you accept that possibility as real, you begin a process that leads to its expression in the world. Do not underestimate the power of assumption. Entire lives change when a person changes what they believe to be true about themselves. Fortunes change. Relationships change. Opportunities change. Circumstances change. Everything begins with an inner decision. Today, make that decision. Choose the state you wish to occupy. Assume the life you desire is already yours. Feel the relief, the gratitude, the commonly, confidence, and the certainty that would naturally accompany fulfillment. Carry that feeling with you. Let it influence your thoughts, your words, and your actions. The world may not change instantly, but your relationship to the world will. And once that inner shift occurs, outer changes inevitably follow. The secret has always been simple. Not easy perhaps, but simple. Assume it is already yours. Walk in that assumption. Live in that assumption. Persist in that assumption. For the moment you truly accept that what you desire is already yours, you cease being someone who hopes for a better future and become someone who is already living from it. And from that state, reality has no choice but to reflect the conviction you have accepted within yourself. Many people abandon their assumptions too quickly. They begin with enthusiasm, imagining the life they desire. But after a few days they become discouraged because the outer world appears unchanged. They return to old patterns of thinking, old emotional reactions, and old stories about what is possible for them. Then they wonder why nothing changes. The reason is simple. A new assumption must be given the opportunity to take root. If you plant a seed and remove it from the soil every few days, it never has the chance to grow. In the same way, if you constantly replace your desired assumption with doubt, fear, and contradiction, you interrupt the process before it can fully unfold. The mind tends to return to what is familiar. Even when a new assumption is beneficial, the old state often feels more natural because it has been practiced for years. A person who has spent years identifying with struggle may find peace uncomfortable at first. A person who has spent years expecting rejection may find acceptance difficult to believe. A person who has spent years focused on limitation may feel uncertain when imagining abundance. This is why persistence matters. You are not forcing a new reality into existence. You are born, becoming familiar with a new state of consciousness. Every time you return to the feeling of fulfillment, you are teaching yourself a new way of being. There is a tendency to believe that extraordinary results require extraordinary effort. Yet often the greatest effort is simply remaining faithful to the assumption when appearances suggest otherwise. It is easy to feel successful when everything is going well. It is easy to feel secure when there is visible evidence of security. It is easy to feel loved when affection is being expressed. The true test comes when the desired condition is not yet visible. Can you still feel prosperous when your circumstances suggest limitation? Can you still feel chosen when there is no visible confirmation? Can you still feel confident when the world offers reasons to doubt? The individual who masters this discovers a power that most people overlook. They realize that circumstances no longer dictate their state. Instead, their state begins to influence circumstances. Think of how differently you would move through life if you genuinely believed your desire was already secured. You would not approach opportunities with desperation. You would not seek constant reassurance. You would not feel compelled to convince others of your worth. There would be a calm confidence beneath your actions. Desperation often pushes things away because it is rooted in the assumption of absence. Confidence attracts because it is rooted in the assumption of possession. One state says, I hope I can get this. The other says, this already belongs to me. The difference may appear subtle, but its effects are profound. When a person lives in a state of hope alone, their attention remains fixed on the future. They are always waiting. They are always expecting something to happen later. Their fulfillment is postponed. But when a person assumes fulfillment now, something shifts. They begin drawing satisfaction from the present moment. They stop treating ape happiness as a destination and begin experiencing it as a state. This change in attitude influences every area of life. Decisions become clearer. Relationships become healthier. Opportunities become more noticeable. Creativity increases. Anxiety decreases. The individual starts acting from confidence rather than fear. Many people search endlessly for techniques. They look for special methods, secret formulas, or complicated rituals. Yet the most important element is not the technique itself. It is the state from which the technique is performed. A simple assumption held consistently is more powerful than 100 techniques practiced with doubt. Imagine two people repeating the same affirmation. One repeats the words mechanically while secretly believing nothing will change. The other repeats the words while feeling the reality they imply. Outwardly, both appear to be doing the same thing. Inwardly, they are occupying entirely different states. It is the state that produces result. Words have power because of the meaning and feeling attached to them. Visualizations have power because they help you enter a desired state. Imagination has power because it allows you to experience mentally what has not yet appeared physically. Everything returns to the same principle. Occupy the state of the wish fulfilled. When you understand this, you stop asking how your desire will happen. The mind often becomes obsessed with the path. It wants to know every step in advance. It wants guarantees. It wants explanations. Yet many of the most significant events in life arrive through channels that could never have been predicted. Opportunities emerge unexpectedly. Meetings occur at the perfect moment. Information appears precisely when needed. Circumstances rearrange themselves in ways that seem almost impossible. The limited mind cannot always see the path, but it does not need to see the path. Its role is to accept the destination. When you board a plane, you do not person. Ally guided through the sky. You trust that the journey will unfold. Likewise, when you assume your desire is already yours, you are not required to manage every detail of its arrival. Your responsibility is the assumption. One reason people struggle with this principle is that they underestimate imagination. They treat imagination as fantasy rather than reality. They believe that only what can be touched, seen, and measured has value. Yet every creation begins in imagination. Every building existed first as an idea. Every invention existed first as a concept. Every achievement existed first as a possibility in someone's mind. Imagination is not separate from reality. It is the workshop in which reality is formed. When you imagine yourself already being the person you wish to become, you are not escaping reality. You are influencing the reality that will eventually express itself through experience. This requires a shift in identity. Most people attempt to change conditions when keeping the same self-concept. They want different results while maintaining the same beliefs about themselves. A person may desire wealth while continuing to identify as someone who never has enough. A person may desire love while continuing to identify as unworthy. A person may desire success while continuing to identify as incapable. As long as the identity remains unchanged, the outer world tends to reproduce the same patterns. The transformation occurs when you begin seeing yourself differently. The moment you accept a new concept of self, everything else starts reorganizing around that change. Ask yourself who you would be if your desire were already fulfilled. Not what you would have, but who you would be. How would you think? How would you react? What would you expect from life? How would you speak about yourself? These questions point toward a new state of consciousness. Once you discover that state, visit it often. Return to it repeatedly until it feels familiar. Or, owe it to become more natural than the old identity you are leaving behind. Eventually, there comes a point where the desired state no longer feels like an act. It feels like you. It feels normal. It feels obvious. What once required effort begins to feel effortless. That is often when visible changes accelerate. The outer world responds most quickly to what feels natural. If wealth feels unnatural, the mind finds reasons to reject it. If success feels unnatural, opportunities may be overlooked. If love feels unnatural, relationships may be sabotaged. As the desired state becomes natural, resistance diminishes. Life begins flowing in a different direction because your assumptions have changed. Notice how children often receive things more easily than adults. They possess a remarkable ability to imagine without resistance. They do not spend hours analyzing whether something is possible. They enter imaginary worlds completely. For them, the experience feels real. Adults often lose his ability. They become conditioned to believe only in what they can already see. Their imagination becomes restricted by past experiences. Yet the creative power remains the same. It simply needs to be exercised again. Allow yourself to think from the end rather than of the end. There is a significant difference. Thinking of the end keeps the desire separate from you. Thinking from the end means viewing life as though the desire has already been realized. If your desire were already fulfilled, how would you interpret today's events? How would you see challenges? How would you respond to delays? How would you view your future? These questions help shift your perspective from longing to possession. The more often you think from the end, the more naturally the fulfilled state becomes your dominant state. As it becomes dominant, your reactions begin changing automatically. You no longer need to force positive thoughts because your identity itself has shifted. The world then starts, reflecting this change in subtle and unexpected ways. Conversations begin opening doors. New possibilities appear. Circumstances that once seemed fixed begin moving. People respond differently. Opportunities emerge from directions you had not considered. At first, these changes may seem small. Yet each one reinforces the new assumption, making it easier to remain faithful to the desired state. Gradually, what once existed only in imagination begins taking on physical form, revealing more and more evidence of the reality you accepted within. One of the greatest misunderstandings is the belief that time has power over your desire. People often say, "It has been too long," or "If it were going to happen, it would have happened by now." They measure possibility by the calendar rather than by consciousness. Yet the length of time something has been absent does not determine whether it can appear. What determines the outcome is the state you consistently occupy. A person can spend 10 years, hours wanting something and remain exactly where they are because they never leave the state of wanting. Another person can enter the state of fulfillment and witness dramatic changes within a short period because they have shifted their consciousness. The difference is not time. The difference is identity. The world often teaches that seeing is believing. But the deeper truth is that believing precedes seeing. What you genuinely accept as true eventually becomes visible. Every assumption is like a blueprint. The physical world simply follows the pattern that consciousness provides. Think about how many limitations people inherit from their environment. They grow up hearing certain beliefs repeated again and again. They are told what is realistic, what is practical, what is impossible, and what they should expect from life. Over time, these ideas become assumptions. Eventually, they are accepted without question. Yet many of these assumptions were never consciously chosen. They were absorbed. The moment you become aware of this, you gain a tremendous freedom. You realize that assumptions are not permanent. They can be replaced. They can be revised. They can be transformed. If you inherited beliefs about lack, you can adopt beliefs about abundance. If you inherited beliefs about failure, you can adopt beliefs about achievement. If you inherited beliefs about struggle, you can adopt beliefs about ease. You are not obligated to remain loyal to assumptions that no longer serve you. The challenge is that old assumptions often disguise themselves as facts. They feel true because they have been repeated so many times. Yet familiarity does not make something permanent. A belief may feel natural simply because it has been practiced. Consider someone who constantly says, "Nothing ever works out for me." After years of repetition, this statement begins to feel like reality. Every disappointment appears to confirm it. Every setback strengthens it. The person eventually P.S. questioning the assumption altogether. Now imagine that same individual gradually replacing the assumption with a new one. Imagine them accepting the idea that life supports them, that opportunities come easily, that favorable outcomes are normal. At first, the new assumption may seem unrealistic, but with persistence, it begins gaining strength. Over time, it feels increasingly natural. Eventually, the person starts noticing evidence that aligns with the new belief. What changed? Not the external world first. The assumption changed first. This principle applies to every area of life, because every area of life is influenced by the state from which you operate. Many people underestimate the importance of expectation. Yet expectation is simply assumption projected into the future. What you expect reveals what you believe to be true. If you expect rejection, you unconsciously prepare for rejection. If you expect disappointment, you unconsciously prepare for disappointment. If you expect success, abundance, and fulfillment, your mind begins aligning itself with those outcomes. Expectation shapes perception. It influences what you notice, what you ignore, and how you interpret events. Two people can experience the same circumstance and derive completely different meanings from it. One sees an obstacle and concludes failure is inevitable. The other sees the same obstacle and interprets it as temporary. Their assumptions determine their reactions. The individual who assumes success is already theirs does not panic at every delay. They do not interpret every challenge as a sign that something is wrong. They remain anchored in the conviction that their desired outcome is inevitable. This stability is powerful because most people are constantly reacting to appearances. Their emotional state rises and falls according to external conditions. Good news makes them confident. Bad news makes them fearful. As a result, they never establish a consistent state of consciousness. But the person who understands the creative power of assumption develops a different relationship with circumstances. They recognize that appearances are temporary. They understand that current conditions are merely reflections of previous states. Because of this understanding, they refuse to surrender their desired assumption every time an unwanted event occurs. Instead, they continue identifying with the reality they have chosen. This does not mean ignoring life. It means interpreting life from a higher perspective. It means recognizing that every experience is part of a larger process unfolding according to inner conviction. There is tremendous strength in remaining mentally faithful to a vision that has not yet appeared. Most people abandon their desires at the first sign of contradiction. They treat obstacles as evidence against their dream. Yet obstacles often reveal nothing more than the persistence of old assumptions. They are echoes of previous states. They are aunts of an identity that is already being left behind. When you understand this, you stop reacting so strongly to temporary appearances. You stop treating every challenge as a final verdict. Instead, you remain focused on the state you have chosen to occupy. This is why inner discipline is more valuable than outer control. You cannot always control events. You cannot always control other people. You cannot always control timing. But you can control the meaning you assign to experiences. You can control the assumptions you accept. You can control the state in which you choose to live. That choice becomes increasingly important because assumptions are active whether you are aware of them or not. Every day, people imagine outcomes. They predict events. They anticipate conversations. They rehearse possibilities. Unfortunately, many of these mental activities are directed toward unwanted outcomes. A person imagines failure before an opportunity even arrives. They imagine rejection before or speaking. They imagine disappointment before taking action. Without realizing it, they are practicing the very reality they wish to avoid. What would happen if that same imaginative power were directed differently? What would happen if you consistently imagined favorable outcomes? What would happen if you anticipated success rather than failure? What would happen if you mentally rehearsed fulfillment rather than lack? The answer is that your inner world would begin changing, and that change would eventually express itself externally. The mind becomes what it repeatedly contemplates. If it repeatedly contemplates limitation, limitation becomes familiar. If it repeatedly contemplates possibility, possibility becomes familiar. This is why mental images matter so much. The pictures you carry within yourself influence your expectations, emotions, and actions. Imagine carrying the image of yourself as someone who always succeeds. Imagine carrying the image of yourself as someone aptly loved, deeply respected, deeply prosperous. Imagine accepting these images not as fantasies but as realities already established in consciousness. Notice how different your reactions would become. You would not approach life from insecurity. You would not constantly seek proof of your worth. You would not need endless validation because your identity would already contain the qualities you desire. Many people search for confidence in achievements. They believe confidence will arrive after success. Yet true confidence often emerges first. It comes from accepting a new concept of self before external evidence appears. Once that concept becomes stable, achievements naturally follow because they are expressions of identity rather than attempts to create identity. This distinction changes everything. When people attempt to create worth through external achievements, they remain dependent on circumstances. Their self-image rises and falls according to results. But when worth is acquired, accepted internally, achievements become reflections rather than sources. The same principle applies to abundance, relationships, health, opportunity, and every other area of experience. The inner state comes first. The outer expression follows. That is why the secret is never found in circumstances. It is never hidden in a future event. It is never waiting in a distant place. The secret exists within consciousness itself. Every desired condition already exists as a possibility. The question is whether you are willing to accept it as yours, not tomorrow. Not after enough evidence appears, not after every doubt disappears, but now in imagination where all creation begins. The moment you accept a new reality inwardly, you begin changing the lens through which life is viewed. Familiar situations start carrying different meanings. Old fears lose some of their influence. New possibilities begin entering awareness. Gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, your inner world starts reorganizing itself around the assumption you have chosen. Thoughts that once felt impossible become reasonable. Expectations that once seemed unrealistic begin feeling natural. Desires that once appeared distant start feeling closer and more familiar, as though they are no longer something to be attained, but something that is already becoming part of your identity and daily experience. So, as you leave here today, remember this. The life you desire is not waiting somewhere in the future. It is not hidden behind years of struggle, nor is it reserved for a fortunate few. The moment you accept it within yourself, the moment you dare to assume that it is already yours, you begin to change the course of your life. Stop measuring your potential by your present circumstances. Stop asking the world for permission to believe in your dreams. Stop looking outside yourself for proof that what you desire is possible. The proof begins within you. The power begins within you. The transformation begins within you. From this day forward, refuse to identify with limitation. Refuse to define yourself by past failures, temporary setbacks, or current appearances. Instead, claim the version of yourself who already has what you seek. Think from that state. Feel from that state. Live from that state. Let every thought, every expectation, and every inner conversation reflect the reality you have chosen. Because the greatest secret is this: you do not attract what you want, you express what you are conscious of being. And when you consistently assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled, life inevitably moves to reflect that assumption. So walk away with certainty. Walk away with conviction. Walk away knowing that the moment you stop chasing and start assuming, everything begins to shift. The door opens, the path unfolds, and the world rearranges itself in ways you could never have imagined. Assume it, feel it, persist in it, and watch as what once lived only in your imagination becomes the reality you call your life.